Sue Walker, Alabama's energetic poet laureate, is a woman of many talents and interests. Walker has a lifetime of poems behind her and is the publisher of the Negative Capability Press. She teamed with biologist E.O. Wilson in her book on the Mobile-Tensaw Delta, In the Realm of Rivers. She has published an imaginative poetic conversation with Carson McCullers and is working on a study of the poet James Dickey. I spoke with Sue Walker during the Alabama Book Festival at the Department of Education in Montgomery, Alabama.
Sue, it's good to see you.
Good to see you, Don.
I've been looking forward to doing this for a long time. In fact, we're tardy. We should have done this long ago. But anyway, we'll do it now.
Well, it's very good to be doing it now.
Although we are acquainted, not everybody watching the show is acquainted with you. You're a native, aren't you? Where are you from? Where'd you go to school? Where were you raised?
I am a native. I was born in Tuscaloosa. I grew up in Foley, Alabama. I went to Foley High School. I went to the University of Alabama, and then I left to go to Tulane University.
And
so I stayed in the South.
When you were a student at Alabama and Tulane, what did you study?
Bear Bryant and the Alabama football team. I also studied English, but it was an electric time, I imagine, like now at the university when Bear Bryant was there. And so,
well, it's again an important football time.
It is.
But English at Alabama has always been respectable. It's always been pretty good. So while you were studying literature, which includes poetry, what were your feelings about writing poetry? How did that grow?
I had always written poetry as a child, but I never seriously thought about writing poetry until I got into graduate school and was influenced by some of my professors at Tulane and got involved in writing. But I specialized in literature and not really poetry, so poetry is a later, I guess, professional kind of interest rather than an early one, except for playing around with it and sound as a child.
Well, you make it sound almost casual or accidental.
It almost was. You know, I mean, I would write when I was little, if I misbehaved. I found I could write little rhymes as apologies. And I did write, but I wrote more fiction, actually, in high school because I was interested in that. And it was really later, seriously, when I was in graduate school that I ever really thought about being a poet.
Well, you're a poet now. You're the poet laureate of the state of Alabama. How long have you been this?
Since 2003.
Oh, and what is the appointment?
Pardon?
Is the appointment for life?
The appointment was for 4 years, and then I was reelected, so.
Oh, all right then. I had no idea.
Yes.
And insofar as we know what they are, what are the duties of the poet laureate?
Well, you know, each of the states that has the poet laureate defines their own duties. And no one told me there were any specific duties when I became poet laureate. They didn't say, you need to do this or you need to do that. And I thought that I wanted to give something back to the state. I really wanted to promote Alabama literature, Alabama writers, and as poet laureate, Alabama poets.
Yeah. And is your anthology of Alabama poets, in a sense, an outgrowth of your desire to promote and spotlight, highlight Alabama poets?
It is. It was the first thing that I decided that I wanted to do, is to put together an anthology of Alabama poets from Alabama, or poets who had referred to or mentioned or been to Alabama. And so that was the first project that I set for myself.
I'll tell you, I was once upon a time a New Yorker, as you may or may not know, and I still have friends and I still visit. And when I tell friends in New York, for example, that I review a book by an Alabamian once a week, they say that's impossible. It can't be. So what I'm asking, but of course it is. We know it is. What I'm asking you is, when you went to find Alabama poets and poetry for your anthology, what did you find?
An amazing number of poets from Alabama who had been in Alabama, going all the way back to early Alabama history. I was amazed. I didn't realize that so many people were poets in Alabama.
Living or historic? I mean, is your anthology living and deceased?
The anthology is Dead Poets Society as well as living poets, yes.
Are things getting better or not better?
I think there's a renewed interest in poetry. I think nationally, and I certainly think in Alabama. And with the event we're having this weekend, with the readings that we're having with the Alabama Writers Forum, there's just a renewed interest in poetry, and students are excited about poetry and writing about poetry, and I think that's exhilarating.
As poet laureate, are you, I mean, in England we know what they do. They do occasional poems. Have you gotten involved with writing any poems for the inauguration of a college president or the opening of a bridge or anything? Maybe you should if you haven't. Are you?
I have been doing that this year. I wrote a poem, a Helen Keller poem,
right,
for the unveiling of the Helen Keller sculpture in Washington, D.C., and read that.
Good.
And on Sunday, I am going to Tuscaloosa to read a poem for the dedication of the Bryce Cemetery. So those are definitely occasion poems.
Yeah, and they ought to be. I mean,
and they should. Yes, they should be.
That ought to be part of it. Ought to be written up. The next time that there's a situation or a committee or something where they say, let's define the poet laureate's duties, put some on paper so that in the future they'll know they're supposed to do these things. In case there's a backsliding.
Well, I think every poet laureate, and I think this happens nationally, creates their own project or what they want to do, and it grows out of their own interests and history and abilities. So,
well, let's just hope it keeps on happening. Your anthology of Alabama poets was published by you published it with Negative Capability. Negative Capability is a functioning publishing house and was a journal.
It started as a journal in 1981 when I graduated from Tulane and moved back to Mobile, Alabama. And there wasn't a job at the university. So I looked in the newspaper and there was an ad editor wanted. So I thought, I'll apply. And then I thought, I don't know what I'm doing here. What's this editor for? But it was for Mobile Bay Monthly. I mean, what is now Mobile Bay Monthly, but it was Alabama Sun at that time. So I edited that magazine for a year, and I loved it. I loved the changes that were happening. And then when I got a job the next year, I thought, I don't want to let this go. I love this. This is fun. So I thought I can just put out a journal and do both things. So that's how Negative Capability came about.
All right. I will be the 1,000th person to ask you. It's a quote from Coleridge, yes?
No, Keats. John Keats.
Then I'm not only am I the 1,000th, but I'm the 1,000th person to get it wrong. And it means what? Negative capability.
John Keats, in a letter to his brother, said, I know what quality goes to make a man of achievement, especially in literature, and which Shakespeare possessed so enormously. I mean negative capability, the capacity to be in doubt without irritable reaching after fact and reason. And I think that we reach irritably after fact and reason, and I know I do. And I want to be capable of tolerating uncertainty and to accept creatively whatever the world has to offer. So I loved the quote, and so I chose it for the journal.
I came to know about your journal because I was looking for, I was educating myself about Eugene Walter, and that was one of the places that I was sent, that he was connected with your magazine, that he was published in your magazine. Was he like staff? Was he just a contributor, or was he a part of the operation?
He was a mentor. He was an inspiration. He was a friend. He taught me so much about poetry, about writing, about putting together a magazine, and he gave us many of our covers. And Eugene would always be late. And so you would have to, on the morning you had to go to press, go over and wrench the cover out of his hand. We have to have it, Eugene. So, and his covers were always whimsy and delightful. And
Right.
he was just a great joy.
Dancing cats,
Dancing cats.
playful monkeys, very interesting daisies and other flowers. He was a character. Absolutely. We all miss Eugene, no doubt about it. Another Southern character that has obviously meant a lot to you is Carson McCullers. You have a volume, verse, conversation with the deceased Carson McCullers. Speak for a moment about what's special about her. Why does she intrigue you? Why would you go to the effort of choosing her and imagining a conversation with her? What does Carson McCullers mean to you, and why should we know more about her?
Well, I specialized in Southern literature at Tulane and was reading a lot of Carson McCullers and decided that I would write my PhD dissertation on Carson McCullers, on love, music, and time in the fiction of Carson McCullers.
Right.
And I had done so much research, and she wouldn't get out of my head, and she wouldn't leave me alone. So I had been invited to a conference on Carson McCullers in Columbus with writers who had been influenced by Carson McCullers.
Oh.
And I thought, I don't really want to write another academic paper. And so I just sat down and imagined over the years, because I had been reading Carson McCullers and studying her, that we were talking together. Then we knew each other, and the poem just came.
She's a very odd woman.
Yes, she is.
I mean, I've read 2 different biographies of Carson McCullers, and it's, well, not to put too fine a point on it, it's painful. She was in pain. She led a very, very difficult life.
She did, because she'd had strokes, and she was partially paralyzed,
Yeah.
and yet she managed to achieve a great deal in spite of her disabilities.
Now another Southern literature character who's important in your life is James Dickey, and I confess I thought that Dickey, that you had studied with James Dickey. It turns out you have studied James Dickey. And now what is your project that regards Dickey's poetry?
Well, I split my time, I think, between, academic pursuits and poetry. And I had been writing articles on James Dickey for a number of years with the idea that this article and this article and this article would add up to a book. And I was very interested, because I'm interested in nature and the environment, of how James Dickey's works all reflect some aspect of the environment, and our ruining the environment and not understanding the environment in terms of understanding ourselves. That when we understand ourselves, we understand our place in the world we live. And so I started writing this, and I've just signed a contract with Mellon Press for a book on the integral ecology of James Dickey. So I'm going through each of his novels and his 17 Puella poems and the May Day Sermon, and writing about self in relation to nature.
Well, the word nature provides me with a segue which is simply unimpeachable. And that is, I have here, In the Realm of Rivers, which is your book with photographs by Dennis Holt of the Mobile and the Tensas Delta. And amazingly, an introduction by E.O. Wilson, who is probably the most important person in the country as regards the environment and our need to save it. I was astonished the other day when I called your house and you said that E.O. Wilson was at your kitchen table. You and he are acquainted, obviously. He helped with this book.
Yes, I think that I consider Wilson a friend.
Yes.
And when we took him back to his hotel last night after his event at Blakely State Park, he was saying it's good to see a friend again. And so I really consider him a friend now. And we're redoing another expanded version of the Delta book, which he will write the foreword to. And it was wonderful leaving the campus and driving across the causeway and going into the Delta and learning the trees, the birds, the rivers, interviewing swampies who had grown up in the swamp, and it was a wonderful project.
This is a piece of territory that's almost inadvertently unspoiled because you can't get there. You can't get in there. I recall his saying that. Have you traveled obviously you've traveled in this swampy
I have been, by boat, which is how you get to a lot of places. And it's serene. It's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. This question has no right or wrong answer, but it has your answer. Why should, here's a moment for you to make your plea, why should a person care about places like the Tensas Delta?
E.O. Wilson would say that in preserving the world, we preserve ourselves. And I definitely think that it is our mission to care for and preserve this earth on which we live. And I think we're destroying it. Mm-hmm. And everyone needs to be aware of their responsibility, I think, to the environment, to keeping it vital and alive and not letting so many species become extinct.
Yeah, it really is. It's almost obvious, except it doesn't catch on as we wish it would. I mean, the environment is constantly under assault, even though it seems perfectly clear that that's wrong. How this is a prodigious piece of work here. How will it be expanded?
Well, we want to add some. I want to add some more interviews. Dennis has different pictures. I really want to expand the section on E.O. Wilson.
By him or on him?
There's an interview with him, and I want to expand that.
Good.
There are things with the Native American Indians and that I didn't get in there, and so I want to go back and put that into it as well.
Good.
A little more Baldwin County. So.
Right. Good. Well, this is prose, of course. I mean,
it's prose and poetry.
Yeah. Over time, at this point, how many books of poetry do you suppose you have?
I think I have 8 or 9 books of poetry. Yes.
Over our long acquaintance, I've heard you read many times. In the last couple of years, I've been struck by what I think is more lightheartedness, more accessibility, more humor, more, let me tell you what it's like to be a middle-aged lady. Am I right about that?
I think you are.
Think that way?
I mean, it's, as you get older, I think, it's just joy. You appreciate being alive in this world. I'm a breast cancer survivor. And as a survivor, I think I love every day. I'm not worrying about all the little things that I may have worried about in the past. And so, perhaps so.
Well, you look like a person lately, in public at least, a person who's having a good time. And I guess it's so, isn't it?
I think so, yes.
You have a brand new book, don't you?
I do.
How new is this book?
I got some early copies, actually, on Thursday. And put them in my car to drive them up here.
Yesterday?
Yesterday,
Yeah.
Yes. That's how new. It's actually not even out yet, but I just received some early copies to bring up here.
Well, this is the news then. And I've asked you, and I think you've chosen a couple, to read on camera so that we can get an idea of what your own work is like.
Okay,
not James Dickey's or Carson McCullers,
I would love
but your own.
I thought I would read this one first because it's tax time, or at least it was.
Yes.
And so this is a poem about financial statements and banking. It's called Not in the Realm of Numbers. She said, banking is business, is a rhinoceros without an acceleration clause. She said she tried to treat it as accrued interest and turned on her computer opened the attachment, and was halted like an elephant trying to fly. Attachment, she said. She did not have an attachment to forms, to liabilities. Who needs them? She had spent her life ridding herself of such things, and only wanted to bond with poetic essence and truth. She believed that the sum of the n prime number is equal to n over 2 partial sums that is equal to n plus 1, and concludes with n over 2 n plus 1. Nothing limits an ability to formalize, she said. She did not want to exist in a realm of numbers detrimental to her health. Her business lay in anapests and iambs, in trochees and rondo variations. Such measure gave her inordinate pleasure. Although she needed to get a loan, she was sorry, but she could not, at this time of her life, wrestle with financial statements. She had been there, done that, and vowed to steer clear of undue reportages.
Poet does her taxes. Thank you. And the other one?
The other one is because I teach Southern literature and involved with Southerners. Am writing a lot about, I guess, tidbits I pick up about other Southern writers, and this is Flannery O'Connor reads Edgar Allan Poe.
Oh.
And this is a true account. She said she read the Book of Knowledge as a child and learned to love Edgar Poe. Relished the story about a young man who was too vain to wear glasses and married his grandma by accident. She savored the tale about a man who went to his room, removed his wooden arms, his wooden legs, his hairpiece, artificial teeth, voice box, etc. And while she didn't comment more about whether or not the head in the bed had anything left beyond hearing aids and 2 glass eyes bearing down on the brink of discovery, she said she appreciated the certificate she earned in the summer reading course offered at the Atlanta Public Library, the summer of 1937, when she was 12.
Flannery O'Connor. And this is brand new, so it's almost cruel. I mean, you to ask you what you're going to do next, because this book is, the ink is practically still wet. But you have the Dickey book that you're going to work on. But in terms of your own, the trajectory of your own poetry, your own writing, what do you imagine you're going to do for the next 10 years? What direction do you want to go in?
I have about 150 pages of a novel on the back burner.
Oh.
So that when I finish the Dickey book, I'll probably go back to the novel, which is about the yellow fever epidemic in Mobile, Alabama in 1878, which was the last epidemic of yellow fever in Mobile.
And that'll be the time and the place. Do you have, will it be told from the point of view of a 9-year-old, 80-year-old, a woman, a man? How are you going to deliver this?
I'm not quite sure, because I've written in the 150 pages, I've shifted it around in terms of point of view. But I think it's going to be from the husband's point of view who lost his wife, who died of yellow fever.
Well, it's not a cheerful subject. But
So, but he had, and we're talking about the placage era in 1878, just after New Orleans, when men went over and bought themselves a mistress and kept her and put her in a house. And so he has his mistress and a child with a mistress, and she comes to Mobile and claims her son. So
Eugene would love this novel. This would be very much up his alley. Well, between the Dickey book and finishing up a novel and your duties as they grow as Poet Laureate, I'm sure you're going to keep yourself busy. Sue, thank you very much.
Thank you, Don.
This has been a real pleasure.
To order this season of Bookmark on DVD, call 1-800-463-8825. Additional information can be found on our website at www.alabamatv.org.